you've got to tell me the name of the cat, otherwise I can't continue. What a beautiful creature.
Oh, thank you. His name is Nino. There,
Nina. Yeah.
yeah, the sister is Nina, but she's somewhere.
Okay. Nina and Nina, that's so striking. Oh my goodness. Do you know what? Today, at lunchtime, I gave myself an hour and I drew my dog Ruby. She has a very beautiful profile. And I thought I need to take a break from work, and I just sat down and drew her, and it was very very rewarding. I would do the same for your cat, Benino, because look at him. He's such a poser. He's brilliant. He's
I
keeping
know.
still.
I was gonna say you did a cat movie with what Amazing Maurice.
Yes, I did. Yes, of course. That was the previous film, The Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, and I love that movie out of Sundance. That was terrific.
great. Oh yeah, that came out well. Thank you for saying that. It was a what was interesting is that I was producing that simultaneously with the Canterville Ghost. So I had these two films running simultaneously, and part of the benefit of the pandemic was, we're all directing from our offices, and that's kind of what happened with both of those films until the end, and we were eventually allowed out to go and talk to people. But
It's
anyway.
it's the end. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations for the Canterville Ghost. I found it entertaining and humorous. And since you brought up that you did both films simultaneously, is it with the same animation studio or is it different animation studios?
Very different. Yeah, two different productions, different production companies. Obviously, I'm a common factor, but no, very different studios. Maurice was made in Germany and in England, a studio in Sheffield. Canterville was animated in India, with pre-production in New Zealand and post-production in Ireland. So, one of the great things about animation is there are no boundaries. You travel the world, or sometimes on Zoom only. And I have visited those places now. But yes, it's interesting. You sort of pick and choose partners from around the world, and what's one of the great privileges is being able to do that.
So how are you brought on board to direct the Canterville Ghost? If I look at your filmography, most of the time you usually produce these type of projects.
No, I do, but I used to run an animation studio in London where I was writing and occasionally directing. So, and directing's always been part of what I do. I can draw as well, so that makes a difference when working with animators and with studios. And on Canterville, I didn't set out to be the co-director, I have to say, partly because of these simultaneous films. Um, but it just became obvious that it needed two of us. We had to break up scenes. We had, if you look, the great history of animation, you often get two directors on all the great Disney movies, because you just have to sort of split the workload. And because we were working remotely, Kim and I just had to share things out. And in a way, Kim did a lot up front, and Kim did a lot of the design work on the film, and then I was looking after the sort of finessing of the direction, some storyboarding, and then the editing. It was a strange split, but it worked.
Now, a story like this, this is a reimagination of the Oscar Wilde story, and it's been adapted so many different times already. I
Yes.
mean, how are you going to try to do this, differently from the others?
Well, I think one advantage we have at Gig is it's animated, so we're going to do things that the others perhaps couldn't have done. In VFX now, I've no doubt you can do anything that we do in animation, of course. But with Charles Lawton, Patrick Stewart, John Gielgud, David Niven in the 70s, they didn't have the same access really to effects. Not that that should hinder imagination, but if you read the Oscar Wilde story, Oscar does not tell us what happens in the third act. He does not tell us what goes on in the walled garden when Virginia and Sir Simon travel to save Simon's soul and to lift the curse. And that was the starting point for me on reading the story. It was like, well, I want to know what happened in that garden. And what's more, I want to show it. This is what a movie should be. It should always be showing rather than telling. It's a basic rule. And so that was our starting point, and we put a lot of effort into that third act and the exploration of all the themes in the walled garden. When people see it, they'll see it's a very different world to where they've come from. With the regular Canterville and its grounds, we wanted very much of a beautiful English rolling landscape through the different seasons. You get snow, you get sun, you get a lovely, beautiful summer horse ride through a cornfield. But the walled garden is different. It's like a sort of a fractured version of that world, a clockwork version of that world. And that for me was what I knew we could bring with the animation, to really lift things up visually, in that confrontation between Simon and his fate.
Well, of course, changing the settings, I want to say it's like 1910s or something like that. And the use of technology into a story like this also differentiates from the other films, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Oscar Wilde's story was like before the 1900s. It was like,
yes, it was 1891 it was published, and we set ours emphatically in 1900. You see the gardener putting the date on one of the cemetery stones at the end as 1900. But we also, in designing the film, allowed ourselves some slippage in that there's a motor car in it, which any car expert will tell you is no earlier than 1905, possibly 1910. And also there's a cute little trick, when Mr. Otis, he introduces electricity to the estate. When the candles get blown out and he relights it, he pulls out a Zippo lighter. I mean, I love Zippo lighters. Who doesn't? They're a sort of iconic thing. And the Zippo, I think, was invented in 1933. So I quite like films that are aware of breaking the rules and just shuffling the chronology around to suit them. And so we did that. We gave ourselves the right to do that.
I want to say it's actually okay, because this is geared towards kids, and I don't think a kid's going to say, wait a minute, a Zippo lighter doesn't come
I
up.
would have been that kid, I think. but and if they do, and I expect that someone on IMDb at some point, I might send them a bunch of flowers when they say, "Hey, Mr. Otis pulls out a Zippo lighter. This wasn't invented." You know what those IMDb comments are like. They're quite good fun when people point out the anachronistic details.
Yeah, that's true. You will have those cinephiles that will point
Yeah.
point out the errors and so on. But the story of the Canterville Ghost is a humorous short story by Oscar Wilde. Tell us about the development for the humor for the kids, because this is the audience that you're trying to go after.
Yeah, although I have to say, Gig, I'm trying to go wider than just children. I do want the film to feel that parents can get something from it, grandparents can get something from it. But the children, of course, we made the film for ages 5 and up, and you can't be too scary, for example. That's obvious, and no one really knows how much children like to be scared or not. There's no measure of this. I think it's down to the individual. So we went a little. We gave good ghost story at the front, but then once we'd done that, we sort of pulled back a bit on the scares. We pulled back a little bit on the music as well, so it didn't feel so relentlessly spooky. But then what we did in terms of adapting the story is we took out the older son of the family, Washington, so that there was more emphasis on the effects of the ghost on Virginia. We aged her up a little bit, so she became a sort of mid to late teens. And then, of course, we have the twins, Lewis and Kent. And I think I guess they're about 11 years old. Those are the real horrors of the house, I have to say. So Simon is nothing compared to what those boys can do. And that was part of the fun. Oscar doesn't really go too far with that, but we did. We had those boys absolutely terrorizing that ghost. The poor Simon. They not only scared him physically, they scared him emotionally. They knew how to get him. They knew what would make him burst into tears, if you like, and they did that by insulting his ability to be a ghost, and so on. So I always knew that the two boys were like I call them our Tom and Jerry characters, but we could do some knockabout humor with those guys, and generally have them running riot and tearing up the place. It was only at the very end, once the pandemic had lifted, we were able to get young American actors to play those boys, and I think having those children's voices, the same age as the characters, or is always good for children as viewers, because they like to hear other children, and it draws them into the story. So I hope they get that, and I also hope they get the moment when the twins hold hands when Virginia's life is at stake, because these boys, although they cause a lot of trouble, they're also part of the family, and they will fight to protect their sister if they have to.
That is true. That is true. And speaking of your voice cast, you've done wonderfully with your voice cast. So many people to name, but your two main ones were Stephen Fry and Emily. I mean, could you talk about that? I mean, I feel like Stephen could voice anything now these days.
Yeah, Stephen could voice Nino, sitting there right now. I'm sure he could. Stephen's brilliant. He loves Oscar Wilde. He loves Sir Simon. And yes, he's a character, but like all great characters, you know them. If you really feel for them, you know who that character is. So Stephen knew fundamentally the vulnerability, the tragedy of Sir Simon being trapped in that house and forlorn, and not being able to see his wife for 300 years, and the guilt he felt about how his wife's life ended. So all of that stuff, to me, is the stuff of great drama. Stephen was able to bring to bear on Sir Simon's exchanges. Yes, he's quite cocksure at times when he's had a successful haunting, but he very rapidly becomes crestfallen when he then meets the boys, or he realizes, like all of us really, I'm not as grand as I thought I was, or the world isn't working the way I thought it was going to work. And so for me, there was that universality which Stephen as an actor could tap into. Emily as Virginia was interesting. She was cast quite late, simply because the film took a long time to set up. Stephen didn't change over those 10 years, but an Emily, Virginia would have done. And so we didn't cast her until later. And Emily, I'm so delighted with the performance she gives. She really brings Virginia to life. She understood what that character was going through. Just trying to be strong and independent and have her own opinions when her dad's a big blustery minister from Boston, thinks he knows how everything works, and of course he doesn't either. But Virginia, there's a strength to her which is not an easily won strength. There's a vulnerability, there's a steeliness, there's a determination, there's a courage to her, which I think is really, really good. And Emily, somehow, this is the advantage of working with great actors, brings all those qualities to bear on the character. And I know, we showed this film at some festivals in France before the release, and people were responding so well to Virginia. I mean, I had lots of women coming up to me after the screening saying, thank you so much for Virginia, and so I felt very good about that. I thought, yes, here's a strong character, who's also, like I say, has her own vulnerability. She's not so strong that nothing touches her.
And one last thing, how did you decide to come up with the look for Simon? Because everybody else looks normal and wonderfully animated, but Simon looks very comical in its own way.
Yeah, no, the design of Sir Simon was interesting. He evolved over time. But again, that was Kim Burden, my co-director on this. He a very brilliant artist, and he drew Sir Simon. He looks automatically comical because he's wearing the garb of an Elizabethan, gentleman, and so that really reminds us that he's out of time in compared to Mr. Otis's suit, and his pantaloons and the codpiece, his ruffle, all of those things which were perfectly acceptable in his time, and he's very proud and thinks he looks great in them. But as I said, the theme of modernity versus the old values is one of the great joys of the film, and he doesn't quite get that the rest of the world has changed. It's a bit like meeting a musician who was in his prime, maybe he was 18 or 19 in a punk band, and at 50 or 60 he's still dressing the same because he thinks he looks cool. And Sir Simon's the same, really. He's still wearing his sort of grand, expensive gentleman's outfit. So there's that I think that adds to the comedy of him, but also the tragedy of him, because time has passed him by, and the first thing he remarks upon seeing Virginia is gadzooks, a woman wearing trousers, it's against nature. So he's got he's in for a lot of learning to do.
Most excellent. So, Robert, what's next for you? More animation?
No, surprisingly, I've got a live action. I do both, and I've got a horror film coming next, which is a nice two-hander written by an author called Kim Newman. And after, yeah, there are a couple of other animated features in the works. They always take longer, not only to raise finances for, but also to make. If a regular live action film takes a year, for example, then an animated film is 2 to 3 years. So you always have to they take longer basically, but there are some sequels coming to films that have already been made, and some fresh stuff too, but I'm really sorry, I'm reluctant to give too many details about them, but certainly we've already sketched out a sequel for Canterville.
Most excellent. Well, Robert, I enjoy this conversation with you. I wish I had more time, but I want to note that I've done thousands of interviews, and you're the first person who ever said gadzooks to me. So
That's good. And maybe codpiece as well. If we
that's true.
I think it was the influence of Nino. I mean, what a beautiful cat. No, of course, it was you, Gig. Yes, it was. I mean, you can tell I could talk about this film a lot because I love it. 12 years, 13, I don't know, I've lost count, of making it. That sort of thing can put you off a project, but I'm full of life for it because it's because of, we kept the heart of it, we kept the themes, and I know what the film means and how it might affect people. So
Well,
that keeps me going.
well, most excellent. Well, hopefully we get to do this again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Gig. It was lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.